While the New Orleans Saints passing offense did get much better towards the end of the 2023 season, in 2024, with their new offense, they hope to reach new heights with their air attack. We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I'm your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're continuing to break down the wide zone offense. We began our look at the run game in yesterday's episode. Today, we begin our look at the passing game with much more on the way in the coming week. The New Orleans Saints are looking to really get a big kind of injection, right? A positive injection into their passing game. How can they get it done? They could do it, first of all, by introducing some new concepts or bolstering some concepts that have kind of fallen to the wayside in the past, like screen passes, RPOs. We'll get to that. We're also going to take a look at the role that crossing routes and misdirection play and how they complement one another to help you attack the middle of the field if you're the New Orleans Saints with this wide zone offense. And to kick us all off, we're going to be taking a look at maximizing the playmakers by putting them in the best position to succeed in this passing game. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day and for being an everydayer here on the show as a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You can make every moment more right now. New customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets, win or lose, by simply signing up. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. So first thing I want to look at here is how the New Orleans Saints can maximize their playmakers by putting them in better positions to succeed based on their skill sets in this new offense going into 2024. Look, the Saints have several potential playmakers and players with playmaking opportunity and ability on their team. The next thing they simply need to do is be able to maximize that and get the most out of what they have there. So putting them in the best case scenarios to succeed based upon what it is that they already do well is a big time imperative. We discussed this on the defensive side of the football quite a bit for the New Orleans Saints. They tend to make sure that their defensive guys are working and doing what it is that they do best, as opposed to simply like overthinking and thinking about the defense too much. The Saints could use a little bit of that over on the offensive side as well. And I think that Klint Kubiak, the New Orleans Saints offensive coordinator, will absolutely be looking to get that done. Now, the big thing is that everything that we look at right now is on paper, right? So we're not really talking about expectations right now. We're talking about what's the vision, what does the system potentially offer New Orleans? And then it's kind of on them when they get on the field to actually show you what the expectations are, what the production can be, all of those other things. So as we look at this, we're mostly just trying to project what this could be, or at least the why behind introducing this system. So I want to start off with one of those players with playmaking ability, one of the biggest names on this team for the New Orleans Saints, Chris Olave. The 2021 first-round selection is going into his third year and expected to be the number one option for the New Orleans Saints offense, at least in the passing game, here in 2024. He won't necessarily be the X receiver or the wide receiver one in that scenario, but he's very likely going to be the first option, the first guy to get all the reps in practice, all those other things. So let's take a look at how Chris Olave was most targeted in the 2023 season. He received 23 of his targets on out routes, 21 of his targets on hitches, which out routes, by the way, are just pushing up and then a 90-degree angle towards the sideline. The hitches are coming back towards the quarterback. 14 go routes, so just running straight down the boundary to the left or right side. 11 slants and 9 screens. You'll notice that a lot of those are outbreaking or perimeter routes. This is going to be a theme as we continue to run through this. Would getting Chris Olave's speed working laterally across the field end up bolstering and giving the New Orleans Saints more opportunities for chunk plays and yards after catch opportunities in games with Chris Olave? I think the answer to that question is yes. That should help quite a bit. Now, Will the New Orleans Saints be able to capitalize on that? We'll find out. But I do think that that is the beginning of the trend that we're looking at here, which is attacking the middle of the field. Let's go a step further. I'll give you a couple of seconds to guess what route Rashid Shaheed was most targeted on in 2023. If you guessed go route, you're absolutely right. 10 passes or 10 targets on go routes in 2023. Now it's actually tied. He also received 10 targets on screen passes in 2023, averaging just 4.1 yards per those plays, right? Per reception on those screen passes. So I think the thing that you're looking at here is that you're already kind of playing to the strength of Rashid Shaheed by allowing him to utilize his speed to take the top off of defenses, post routes, downfield, go routes, fly routes, 9 routes, seam routes, things like that just kind of let him utilize that speed to go deep, stretch the defense, be the field stretcher, all those other things. The New Orleans Saints are going to want to stretch defenses horizontally, but you still have to be able to stretch them vertically in today's game, no matter what. And you want those vertical routes down there because you want to be able to take those shots every now and then. One thing that we're going to get to here in a little bit is yards after catch, a little bit more in depth. But San Francisco last year had over 2,000 yards before catch and was a top 10 team, I believe number 3, when it came to yards after catch. So they were up near the top when it came to within the top 10 when it came to yards before catch, and then within the top 5 when it came to yards after catch. That's the offense that you would like to see, although that expectation is probably a little lofty. But that's the idea here, right? That's what you're trying to replicate. That's what you're trying to mimic. If you're top 10 in both of those categories, you're probably amongst the top 5 when it comes to passing yards as a whole. Certainly the New Orleans Saints would love to be there. Will they? We don't know. A.T. Perry, 5 targets. Now remember, he was only targeted 18 times, right? So we were looking at just the last 7 games of the season, all that other stuff. But his most targeted route, to nobody's surprise, is the go route or the fade route, right? Just working downfield from the perimeter. He brought in 25.4 yards per catch in that scenario and on that route with 3 of his 4 touchdowns. Here's the interesting thing, though. For a guy with so much size, for a guy that could potentially take over the X receiver role next year, and for a guy with really, really good speed for his size running in the 4.4s, he only ran the routes 11 times. The over routes are when you start at one side of the field, push vertically, and curve to the opposite side of the field. Only ran that route 11 times. That was a staple in Michael Thomas's game early on in his career. Seeing if that's a route that A.T. Perry can develop and be charged to run more often, right? Only being asked to run that route 11 times is not A.T. Perry's fault. That's part of the scheme. And so can you find more opportunities for A.T. Perry to get involved in that way? Finally, let's look at Juwan Johnson. Juwan Johnson was targeted more on outbreaking routes than he was targeted on in-breaking routes. When we talk about outbreaking routes, we're talking about those that go to the sidelines. In-breaking routes are ones that break to the middle of the field. Now, we're talking a difference of one target here. Was targeted 29 times to the outside, 28 times towards the inside. But for a tight end, you'd certainly like to see a little bit more of attacking the middle of the field. 29 targets, 20 catches on the outside for 173 yards and a touchdown. To the inside, he was targeted just 28 times, but 17 catches for 195 yards, so a greater average there, and 3 of his 3 touchdowns. So again, a little bit more production from him while targeting the middle of the field, and was severely, I would almost say criminally, underutilized in terms of attacking the seam in this offense. Maybe that's something that we see adjusted here in 2024. So to wrap this segment up, attacking the middle of the field is something you absolutely want to see the New Orleans Saints do more of, and will help to put some of these playmakers and others that I haven't mentioned yet. Taysom Hill, Cedric Wilson's a big part of that as well, and is really, really good in the middle of the field. So all those are absolutely there too, and we're going to get to more of that. But 18% of the time is what the New Orleans Saints did in 2023 in terms of attacking the middle of the field in the passing game. That was tied for 18th in the NFL. San Francisco was at 20%, which was the third highest. And in Houston was at 26%, which was the number one. So just a couple of wide zone offenses there. And then, of course, as we mentioned, Cedric Wilson could be the New Orleans Saints' newest free agent acquisition there, could be pretty big in the middle of the field for them. So let's take a look at a little bit more of that middle of the field attack and how crossing routes and misdirection could improve everything for the New Orleans Saints in that area when it comes to the 2024 passing game. Let's get to that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. The formula for a winning championship is, well, also the formula that's going to end up keeping your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to be able to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Whether you're looking for superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, exhaust kits, and much, much more, whatever it is that you're looking for, you're going to be able to find over at eBay Motors today. So whether you're into speed, power, or style, you can rely on eBay Motors to get you what you're looking for right away. With over 122 parts and accessories for your vehicle, you'll find exactly what it is that you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit the first time, every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. You're going to be able to find everything that you want at the price that you need over at eBay Motors today and help make your car the MVP and start stacking up some of those W's. Keep your ride or die alive today with eBay Motors by visiting ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit available only to U.S. customers. All right, family. The Shanahan-Kubiak system gives the New Orleans Saints exactly what it is that they need to add back to their passing offense, which is a plan to attack the middle of the field. Let's discuss why that's important and how crossing routes and misdirection can end up really, really helping the New Orleans Saints in this area. Two things they didn't really rely on as much as they should have in 2023. We appreciate you very much. As always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream, the first ever of its kind on YouTube when it comes to national sports. All the local experts bringing you all the biggest stories from around the world of sports with intimate knowledge, not just shouting at each other, debate theatrics, all that other stuff you might find on some of those other networks. Get the knowledge from the folks that are there with Locked On Sports Today, which you can find on YouTube and on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. So the New Orleans Saints will get a real opportunity here to at least get a system in place on offense that allows them to be able to have a plan to do some of the things that they weren't doing over the course of the past couple of years. This is pretty similar to what we discussed in yesterday's episode where we talked about the run game. And over the course of the past 3 years, even when offensive line play at tackle was better back in like 2021, for instance, the Saints often, for whatever reason, just started running up the middle with Alvin Kamra. And really, look, it's not just a for whatever reason. It's that they didn't have the other guy to run up the middle. He had to be the bell cow back. And that just never really seemed to change. 2021, 2022, even 2023, when they went out and got Jamal Williams, they relegated Jamal Williams basically being a blocker for the most part. And of course, he dealt with some injuries and things like that too. So that didn't help out. But the opposite of that is true for New Orleans while in the run or for the passing game. So while in the run game, felt like they were overly emphasizing the middle of the field, which could be because they felt they had stronger interior play, which, I mean, if you look at the rushing yards, you look at the averages, you look at the lack of ability to pick up yards after contact, you look at the lack of ability to move the offensive line and create yards before contact. I don't know how you can really make that argument, but maybe that's what it was. The Saints felt that they were stronger on the interior than they were on the outside, and so they ran so much there. But the opposite of that is true for the passing game. Saints oftentimes really, really leaning on the perimeter. Again, only 18% of their passes, according to NFELO, only 18% of their passes going to the middle of the field, while other, going left or right for the most part. Like very, very heavily relying on the perimeter passing game, which caused the Saints a little bit of trouble, particularly early on in the season. So now, what you're really looking for is, can they get back to attacking the middle of the field? And you might ask, Ross, why are you so infatuated with the idea of attacking the middle of the field? Well, let's explain why it's important. Because we say it all the time. You hear it all the time in terms of like, oh, the Saints aren't attacking the middle of the field, or this team needs to attack the middle of the field, or this team's getting gashed over the middle of the field. Why is it actually important? There's a couple of like really rudimentary ideas here. The first of which is that you can create a lot of congestion and confusion in the middle of the defense when you are doing that. Let's hold on to that idea. We're going to come back to that a little bit when we talk about misdirection here in just a second. But remember that congestion in the middle of the field and how that could potentially cause issues for an opposing defense. But misdirection really, really helps you out there quite a bit. It also allows you to keep the game in front of your quarterback. So it allows the quarterback to be able to see things that are developing directly in front of him, as opposed to having to get from left to right and all these other things. Just kind of makes the progression just naturally more achievable. Now, when you're a quarterback that's been playing in the NFL for 7+ years, 5+ years, whatever, it probably doesn't move the needle for you very much. But certainly for young quarterbacks or quarterbacks in new systems, keeping the game in front of that quarterback can certainly have a positive impact. The last piece here is that it, of course, allows you to attack where defenses right now are kind of at their lightest. We're watching defenses get lighter and lighter and lighter. Now you're starting to see kind of the tick over to getting bigger and bigger and bigger because of what the opposing offenses are doing. But you're still in that kind of sweet spot right now to where you could take advantage of lightness over the middle of the field. So when we talk about lightness, what I mean is, on a passing down, let's call it like a 2nd and 7 or a 3rd down or whatever it might be, right? Something that feels, pass heavy. You could get into these situations to where defenses go light. They take one linebacker off the field, they add another defensive back on the field. If it's a 3rd and long, they take 2 linebackers on the field, add 2 more defensive backs over the field. And so that ends up putting a lot of these sort of lighter frames out on the field, which really helps out on the perimeter when you're talking about speed. But when it simply comes down to, can your guy be bigger than this guy on the offensive side, over the middle of the field is really kind of the place to attack in those situations. And we saw the Saints really start to lean into that towards the end of the season, but struggled to get there early on to the season. Like I'd say maybe the last 7 games or so, which is when the Saints, I think it's arguable. I think it's fair to say played their best football of the year towards the end of the season last year. Certainly their win-loss record towards the end of the season kind of backs it up. So those are some of the reasons why you want to attack the middle of the field. One of the players that will help them do that undoubtedly is Cedric Wilson. Cedric Wilson back in 2021, when he had his most successful season with the Dallas Cowboys, did so out of the slot. Now he has an X-receiver build, 6'2" plus, whatever it might be, over 200 pounds. He's got that kind of build of a possession receiver on the outside, but your possession receiver doesn't necessarily always need to be on the outside, right? Think about where Michael Thomas spent a lot of time, which was operating out of the slot. Marcus Colston spent a lot of time operating out of the slot. Cedric Wilson's probably not going to be Michael Thomas, probably not going to be Marcus Colston. That's okay. Can you contribute from the slot by attacking the middle of the field? A lot of what he's done, and those of you that are Saints insiders, you've seen this already in our Cedric Wilson film study. That's one of those big things that he should be able to bring to this team. The other thing is, can A.T. Perry prove something in that same area? We were talking about the over routes, which is a really, really good route for big bodies that can move quickly or that can move fast, right? Depending upon which way you want to look at it. And so if you're big, you're quick, or you're big, you're fast, or you're big, fast, and you're quick, right? Depending upon how you define those terms, over routes are perfect for you. Perfect, because it allows you to be able to get behind a defense, find your way nestled in behind the second level, or the hole as they call it, but the second level of linebackers, and then the kind of 3rd or 4th level, depending upon how you want to look at it, of safeties. And if you can nestle your way in there as a big body, easy to see, easy to fight for the football. And if you've got the speed, the lateral movement from left to right across the field, you're able to leave guys behind, especially those that are playing trail technique, which is a very popular way to play those types of routes. Juwan Johnson was very underutilized in the middle of the field as well, as we discussed in the first segment. So that's where I think you can really kind of help yourself out if you're the New Orleans Saints, is utilizing that type of talent and further developing that type of talent in the middle of the field. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't stop at them. Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, Taysom Hill, Foster Moreau, Alvin Kamra out of the passing game, out of the backfield, which we're going to dig more into that next week. Kendre Miller out of the passing game, out of the backfield. Like, there's so many different opportunities there. And I'll even throw Stanley Morgan Jr. in there just so that I don't leave him out. Like, any player could potentially help you contribute there as long as the system is providing those opportunities. Again, maximizing your playmakers. And of course, there are rookies or potential rookies, draft prospects that fit that scheme and that mold as well. So the reason why I mentioned misdirection, because we were talking about kind of the congestion in the middle of the field, misdirection will help with that. Because if you can freeze those linebackers And because they're seeing a play action or, they're watching some, motion or something like that, like whatever eye candy you can put out there, if you can kind of freeze that second level and then you run all these routes to the middle of the field, those guys are going to get caught flat-footed. And that congestion ends up having, situations where they bump into one another, get caught, looking and peeking in the wrong place and all these other things. Like we used to see this in New Orleans all the time. That's what the New Orleans Saints sort of wide zone offense could potentially bring there. So the crossing routes are great. Attacking the middle of the field is great. And then the addition of misdirection, which has to be aided by success in the run game, will end up exponentially making that more effective, more productive for the New Orleans Saints in 2024 if they get it right. Coming up next, let's take a look at some of the things that will end up building, or that the Saints could end up building upon by either adding to their offense or simply doing more of in their offense in 2024. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. It's not just all about adding new things to the New Orleans Saints offense that will make them better. Sometimes it's also about just doing a little bit more of something that they're not doing enough of or didn't do enough of over the course of the past few years. And the Saints can absolutely find that in screen passes, RPOs, and bringing back the old slant route, because that's been missing from this New Orleans Saints offense as well. Appreciate you very much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out a couple of our friends, Locked On Pelicans, Locked On LSU, for your second listen today as well. And don't forget, we are your team every day. So we'll be back Monday with our mock draft Monday. And then all next week, we're looking at position by position, how the wide zone offense ends up impacting players in those position groups. So like running back, offensive line, and then beyond just looking at the players that are already in-house, we'll take a look at some of the draft prospects that are good fits as well. So lots of good stuff coming up next week. So as we continue our early look at the wide zone offense, the Shanahan system, and how the passing game ends up getting impacted by that, I think it's important to point out some of the things the Saints kind of have done a little bit of, but either need to kind of reintroduce to their offense or bolster in their offense. Let's start with the screen passes. The screen pass has been severely lacking for the New Orleans Saints over the course of the past couple of years. And that's a major hit to running back pass production, right? That's one of those things where you could really get them involved. But now you also have some of these receivers that you can get involved that way. Rashid Shaheed is a very, very good kick returner and punt returner. Get him the ball in his hands with some blockers ahead of him and allow him to be able to do that. If we look at the screen passes that the New Orleans Saints have thrown, they've typically been low quality screen passes, ones where maybe the blockers aren't engaged on the outside or in time, ones where the target itself of the ball is forcing the receiver to make extra extraneous wasted movement, things like that. You're already seeing the Saints kind of not necessarily tip their hat, but at least show that they're a little bit ready to introduce more screen passes into their offense. And one of the examples of that is going back again to Cedric Wilson. But this goes not just because of Cedric Wilson's ability in the middle of the field, but also his ability as a blocker. You like the big-bodied, big slot guy that can stand in there and effectively extend your offensive line further out by giving you that big body you can put in the slot, and that can block for you. And then that ends up being a great way to get some blockers ahead for your running back, or even tunnel screening a guy from the outside in to get him behind Cedric Wilson, let Cedric Wilson kind of lead the charge along with some of those other pulling blockers, and then get that receiver with some protection up ahead of him and all that. So we're already kind of seeing some hints that might be on the way. The other thing that would be really interesting to see is that the New Orleans Saints use more RPOs. The Saints last year ran 23 RPO plays with Derek Carr, 20 of which with Taysom Hill. So considering that Taysom Hill was under center or at quarterback, not under center, but in shotgun or at quarterback, to a much lesser extent than Derek Carr, obviously, right? Because Derek Carr is your quarterback, and then you were using Taysom Hill in this other role. A high percentage, though, of RPOs. So maybe that's something that we see a little bit more of for New Orleans. But one thing to keep an eye out on is that when Klint Kubiak was working with Kirk Cousins back in 2021, Kirk Cousins who had less than 10 of those RPO passes. But is that something that maybe he picked up a little bit more of from San Francisco and then brings specifically to help out and add to the Taysom Hill playbook? Could be really, really interesting to see the way that they go with that. The other thing that I wanted to highlight was the slant pass. So we keep talking about like attack in the middle of the field, right? Derek Carr threw only 37 slant patterns in 2023. 37. That's not a lot. That's not a crazy low amount, but it's not as much as we're accustomed to seeing here in New Orleans, that's for sure. Now, there are several reasons why that could have happened. Play call might not have had a slant built in. Play call might not have had a slant as an early enough read to counteract maybe when pressure was coming, things like that, or at least when the internal clock, if I got to get the ball out, set in. Throw selection, maybe the slant wasn't there. Maybe the slant was on a backside where a defender was cutting off a throwing lane, or a rusher was cutting off a throwing lane, things like that. Lack of separation, the route just simply wasn't open, or just simply lack of trust, chemistry, ability, any number of things that could go along with that. So when it comes to attacking sort of the middle and utilizing those types of routes, let me give you an idea of what Klint Kubiak could potentially bring. Let's look at 4 routes. The slant, which is exactly what it sounds like, a little bit of a push and then a diagonal push to the middle of the field. Digs, which are going to be a vertical push followed by a 90-degree cut to the middle of the field. Let's go over routes, which we explained earlier. And then, of course, the drag routes or mesh concepts where you see a player effectively fire off the line of scrimmage and then within, let's call it 5 to 7 yards, just run across the field, right? The old Madden special. Combining all 4 of those routes, Derek Carr threw 92 of those passes in 2023. Back in 2021, when Kirk Cousins was working with Klint Kubiak and quarterback coach Andrew Janocko, who's really, really good at coaching the quick passing game, he threw 147 targets to those routes combined. So we're looking at over a 50 pass difference, despite the fact that those 2 players were relatively close in terms of number of passing attempts as a whole. So a greater focus towards the middle of the field, a greater focus on what would also be quick passes, right? Digs, slants, drags, all quick pass game stuff. And all things that are very, very present, all routes that are very, very present in the wide zone offense. Why? Because of misdirection. So now we're starting to tie it all together, right? If you end up running to, remember yesterday we were breaking down sort of the attack points for the running back. 9 on the left side is all the way outside the tight end. 8 on the right side might be all the way to the opposite side of the tight end on the right side, right? Like that kind of a thing. Your end to end kind of run game. If you're running a lot of those outside zones and they're working, you're percolating, you're getting down the field, all those types of things, then the logical counterpunch to that play is a bootleg stretch, a bootleg play action that takes you from faking the run to one side or the other, cutting back around, and then having a player run a drag from one side of the field to the other, or having a player run a dig to make sure that they're getting you to the middle of the field, all these other things. Just simply play action, or even just, the drag runs underneath, but then the over route comes over the top. You've been targeting the drag all game. The linebackers play down to the drag. The over route comes up open because nobody's underneath. These are all the misdirection pieces that come in and help to expand this game quite a bit. All right, lastly, let's look at time to throw. We talked about the quick passing game. Kirk Cousins in 2021 working with Klint Kubiak and Andrew Janocko, 2.59 seconds in terms of his average time to throw. Got the ball out very, very quickly. It was the quickest that he had gotten the ball out since 2015 with Washington, and one of his more productive seasons in terms of touchdown to interception ratio in that sort of scheme. Back in 2021, that season, the team was 15th, the Minnesota Vikings 15th in yards after catch. New Orleans last year, 22nd in yards after catch. And then you look at other wide zone offenses, Kansas City, San Francisco, Detroit, Los Angeles Rams. You can kind of throw the Commanders in there with Eric Bieniemy taking over in 2023. All 5, yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of those teams were top 10 in yards after catch last year, as we mentioned earlier on in the show. And then play action, of course, as we're talking about kind of misdirection setting in and stuff like that. Derek Carr, 87 play action attempts last year, according to Pro Football Reference. Kirk Cousins back in 2021, 113. So a lot more of those play action passes. So I think what you're looking for are the opportunities to introduce or reintroduce some core concepts of attacking the middle of the field, screen passes, maybe some RPOs, maybe not. We'll see where that goes. But misdirection complementing those, play action complementing those, motion complementing those. And that's where I think you're going to see a lot of the sort of steps forward in terms of achieving the new heights in the air game in 2024, the goals. Those are the mechanisms that the New Orleans Saints and this new offense and Klint Kubiak are going to use to be able to try to get those things in line to step up the production levels in New Orleans when it comes to the passing game. So that's the way that we're looking at it. Next week, we're going to come back to the passing game. We're going to look at wide receivers and how the wide zone offense impacts them. We'll get to some of the rookies or potential rookies, right? Some of the draft prospects that fit super well in that scheme. Same thing for tight end. We'll look at quarterback. We'll look at running back. We'll look at offensive line. We're going to look at all of it, the draft prospects, the incumbent guys, all of that, and how this system could potentially bolster what it is that the New Orleans Saints are doing, trying to do in the passing game, run game, all of that in 2024. On Monday, Mock Draft Monday. So definitely come through for another mock draft as we get closer and closer and closer to the NFL draft. We appreciate you very much, as always, y'all, for being here. And don't forget, and we thank you very much, as always, too, for making us your first listen of the day. Don't forget, second listen, Locked On Pelicans, fighting for that playoff spot. Can they avoid the play-in? Make sure you go and check out Locked On Pelicans with Jake Madison. And you can also check out Locked On LSU, boop, 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 with Caroline Fenton as well. Appreciate you as always, making Locked On Saints part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.